Today we're going to talk about some really innovative technology improvements that we're using in the space sector.
Welcome to ProfileTree TV, and today we're joined by Denver Humphrey from Arralis. So Denver, thank you very much for coming in and joining us today.
Pleasure, thank you.
Really appreciate it. So tell us a little bit about your company and your own background, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, I'm a local lad. I was brought up in Northern Ireland, and I've pretty much lived here all my life, although I did work away for a little period of time. I went to Queen's University and studied electrical and electronic engineering, and then I went on to study for a doctorate in high frequency electronics in the RF group, as it was known as in those days. It's interesting whenever you look back at what you did for your research. I basically made simplified equations for antennas, which could then be computed using the computers as they were in those days. But of course, if you were to use modern day processors, it could be done in seconds without all that.
Yeah.
So it's funny how technology goes on, you know. Now, Arralis was set up. It's been going 5 years now, and it was our founders basically set it up for security of supply. They had been involved in a program with Roscosmos, which is the NASA of Russia, or the Russian Space Agency. And it was a 5-year program, and I think it was something like 3 years into that program that some of the products that they were developing or buying from another company went out of stock, or they stopped making them, and so that presented them a huge challenge. And so they thought of themselves as the challenge. How do we prevent this from happening again? So for surety of supply, they decided to do it themselves and to do it in Europe. As a result of that, Arralis was founded.
Incredible. And of course, to pick Belfast.
To pick Belfast, yeah. Well, we do have an office in Limerick as well. That would be where our head office would be. Probably most of the engineering would be done in Belfast, but marketing and more engineering these days than there was in the past is done in Limerick as well.
Incredible, excellent. So your industry is space.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely incredible, just to think of the industries that we have here in Northern Ireland, or Ireland as a whole. It's just incredible to think that we're supplying products
to the space industry. People don't actually realise, but the space sector in Northern Ireland is a lot bigger than what they give it credit for. And in fact, the space sector in Ireland as a whole is quite large. There's a company in Dublin, for instance, who have made the heat shield for solar probes and things. There's a company in Portadown who's supplying springs that are going to Jupiter, and it is really quite amazing. And if you think of all the what's known as downstream activity, so that's the data coming from satellites, that the processing and the computing technology and everything that's used on that data, the sector is actually really quite large in Ireland as a whole.
Absolutely incredible. How long before we get an Irish person in space? That's the question.
It's a very good question.
It's about time. I can't believe it. No one's done it yet. But anyway, we'll see. So, what are the companies that you work with? What's the...
Our biggest customer, or our biggest client, would probably be the European Space Agency. We've designed an awful lot of projects for them, and developed a lot of chips, or basically those are very high frequency integrated circuits that are used. And whenever I talk about high frequency, we really work in the region that's about 1,000 times higher in frequency than you would receive on your FM dial on your radio. So those are the type of frequencies that we're working in. And what that allows us to do is, for instance, high millimeter wave radar, as it's called, that means that you can detect, the higher frequency means you can detect smaller objects. So the European Space Agency, for instance, was interested in developing a chipset for that higher radar to develop, say, small objects, such as a bolt or something that's been lost in a launch, which can do serious damage to the International Space Station, for instance. And so that's where we started our developments in. we would never have went for something like the mobile phone market, some saturated market, but something that's niche and would have a large return on investment, and so that's why we developed at these frequencies. One of the big projects that we have started for the European Space Agency is in fact that we're developing an antenna for deep space. Now, if this is the Earth, so if you scale the Earth to that size, mankind's current developments are probably within about a 15 centimeter radius of that. In fact, something like 99% of all our space activity is maintained within this 15 centimeter radius of an Earth that is at this size. The moon, for instance, is only 1.5 meters away, so you're the moon, I'm Earth. The antenna that we're developing for the European Space Agency is actually going to go out into deep space, and in that scale, that's 500 meters away from here. It's a third of the distance to Mars, and that's to detect gravitational waves, which were predicted, of course, by Einstein in his theory of relativity, and now we're actually going into deep space to measure these things. Excellent. And it's our antenna that's going to transmit that data back to Earth.
Incredible. So going out to review these theories from Einstein and
yeah, well, we like to say that we're going to prove Einstein's theory, but of course that's not true. Of course it's been proven before, but it is for a science mission to detect gravitational waves.
Incredible. And so the in fairness is for someone who's not non-engineering, and I'm sure we've loads of people watching this, we're just amazed that we've space companies here in Ireland and Northern Ireland. Never would have known. Of course, you never think. Of
course, yeah.
When you're not involved in the industry and you don't know someone. So space as an industry, it's probably is it growing? Is it there's more investment, or is it?
Space is an area where yes, money is going into. We are seeing. Particularly with Brexit, for instance, that the UK government is certainly making the right noises in terms of putting finance or funding or programs in place to keep the sector alive in the UK. I think there's a little bit of a fear that if Brexit comes, a hard Brexit comes, or whatever, that there are a lot of highly experienced space sector engineers who will go to Europe, and so we are beginning to see movement, perhaps maybe from the UK government, to try and produce programs, and so the UK Space, UK Space as it's known, the UK Space Agency, are now sort of developing programs. Which dear knows sometime in the future. I mean, you're probably unaware that they hope to have a launch facility up and running sort of within 2020, something like that, in the UK, in Scotland, I think, actually. Yeah.
Incredible. So it's getting very close.
Mm-hmm.
So
like people like Invest NI, while it's appreciated that, for instance, Northern Ireland would never be a site for that launch base. But the supply chain for that, we can certainly get on board with that.
And being so close to a potential launch site.
Yes.
Incredible, actually, just to think it's just over the road or over the sea. It's amazing and maybe there's opportunities for more jobs and more experience.
That would certainly be our hope, and not only that, but our hope would be that it would inspire our young people to take up engineering and space engineering in particular.
For sure, and there's a lot of again, just every young boy who's so in awe of everything around space. So I hear it every other day, and the books are out, and how many planets and how far this is. So it's I think I do believe there's so much more interest in it, and I see it in content that we're asked to produce, and even for schools and education. There's so much more focus on space as a topic, so it's incredible to see. So I'm very excited, as I mentioned, to see that we have this technology and expertise here.
Yeah, no. I mean, it is great, and the other thing that it's allowing us to do, for instance, is so some of our innovations and technologies that we're developing for the space industry, we're now trying to put to use on Earth, so to say. For instance, we have been approached by one of the largest automotive manufacturers, and they have asked us to see if some of the innovative technology that we develop for the space industry to help them solve some of their problems with a view to autonomous driving in the future. And so these are some of the situations that we're trying to see some of the innovations that we developed. Our techniques, for instance, to develop the high frequency communications, which Arralis do see as a way forward also for connectivity, for instance, high speed data links and so on. We think that they will eventually go on to the high speed or higher frequencies for high speed. And so if we can produce those at scale, then that's a huge opportunity which we would hope to exploit sometime in the future.
Incredible, and even bigger win. So, and we often hear of technologies that are developed for military, and I guess even space, that do filter down.
Like for instance, Velcro is probably the perfect example of something that was developed for the Apollo program that we use every day.
Yes. Well, who'd have known that? That's right, Kevin. There you go. So could you take us through the life cycle, or how a tech product is?
Yeah, of course. So if we were to think, first of all, you'd have to analyse the idea. Very often you could be presented with an idea that could make a huge amount of money, but may be impossible to make. So you wouldn't start that one, of course. But the reverse is also true. So you could see, oh wow, wouldn't it be great if we could do that, and we would be able to do that. But if you can't make any money from it, then there's no point in doing that as well. I'm really lucky to work with some really smart people, and the idea is that they can develop to approach some of these more challenging technical issues are pretty amazing at times. Some of the concepts that they can come up with, and so it's a development approach where you would do what's called a feasibility study onto it to see whether you can do it, whether it be commercially, technically, or whatever. Do you have the time? Do you have the resources? Do you have the money to actually get that through to development? So you don't want to run out of cash before you start to make money on it, and so on. And so these are all sort of the ideas that you have to get right and ensure before you actually start the project. And then it's just a matter of knuckling down. Somebody once said, was it that genius or is 99% perspiration and 1% inspiration, and engineering is like that very often. I mean, I have been in situations where you may be struggling for a problem for weeks or whatever, and all of a sudden someone just goes, "What if we try this?" And it all seems to fall together at that point. So there is a certain amount of blood, sweat and tears, as they say.
Incredible, yeah. It's amazing. And engineering as a career in Ireland, is it fashionable that people know that there's such opportunities here?
So certainly locally in Belfast, there is a huge draw for well, I'd call it more like computer science engineering and so on. That sector in Northern Ireland in particular is snowballing. It's getting really big, and that's a bit of a problem for us because while people are tending to go to that way, the numbers of people that are going to the more traditional analog, as we would say, routes are not as good. But the jobs are there, and as I say, the sector is really growing, and it would be, people shouldn't be put off by the difficulty of it or whatever, because the rewards and the opportunities are pretty great.
Amazing. So if someone was considering it, putting you on the spot, if someone was considering or wondering future career, is there places that they could actually go and find out about the traditional engineering that is in your business, or is there any advice you'd give them?
It's interesting. The Catalyst Inc., who out at the Science Park, this is something that they have actually, over the past couple of years, tried to develop a program. So it ran for the first time last June, I think it was, and I think they're intending it again. And so we are at that point of hopefully that we will have something that they can get involved with in that. But what they're trying to do is reinvent work experience. So you know that traditional kid going into work experience and basically following a guy around or becoming the tea person of the company for a week. There really isn't much benefit for that on anybody, and what they're trying to do is develop a program over 3 or 4 days, which would take place at the work experience, and try and enthuse young people to get involved in the engineering science tech sector, or the STEM sector. Yeah,
of course, STEM and education now is, yeah, of course. No, but that's really, really important, because actually, you know, people probably don't know what the industry is involved, what's involved. You have perceptions of it, and who they're asking, maybe their parents or teachers who don't know anything about the industry.
Correct.
So actually getting them in and being exposed to the work environment and talking to experts like yourselves, incredible. That you're going to encourage and bring in new blood into the industry, which is
well.
Which is
I think we have to, because we can't continue to go on. Well, we can continue to go on as we are, but if we're really wanting to seize the opportunity, you know of the new space sector, that's like Virgin Galactic and Jeff Bezos and SpaceX and so on. If we are to really grasp hold of that of that sector and to develop products for them, we have to have young engineers and basically our brightest and our smartest of our people to come in to help us to grasp that opportunity.
Incredible. And you brought up the new space, which is brilliant. I'm delighted you did. So Jeff Bezos and Virgin, I've lost count of the names now. You tell me better. So obviously people, space tourism, we hear as a general public, it's going to come, it's going to happen in X number of years. So it's something that's real. You see it happening very soon.
Yeah. So space tourism is only a very small part of the new space sector. It's the fact that you're able to launch. I think it was New Zealand. There was like a teenager launched what's called a small stat. So a small stat is a 10 centimeter cube. That's literally why it's called a small stat. And he was able to raise the funds and get that on board of a rocket and get that launched into space on himself, or with some sort of funding or something. But that sector is opening up to everybody, and that's what's known as the new space. So you have people who are like OneWeb, for instance, putting up all these like small LEO satellites and everything to improve communications, and so the satellite market is expanding hugely. We're not talking about the traditional satellites as we've come to appreciate them, but these smaller sats. This is where we're what we would classify as new space, and that provides a big opportunity for a number of companies around the world to try and get on board with these smaller companies, but with grand ambitions.
Yes, and again, when these companies crack what they're trying to do and start to gain traction, I can just imagine the whole industry just opens up.
So we want to get a part on their satellite, and because they'll be launching 200 or whatever satellites, that would be a lot of fun. I mean, the feeling that you get whenever a part that you've designed is actually launched into space is there is a certain amount of pride and a certain amount of I've done that.
Yeah, it's incredible. Yeah. Just to think, again, you look at the spaceships going up and the rockets, you never think back to where those parts could have been, or what,
and where they were developed or whatever,
and who's behind it. So no, it's really interesting. So do you think that there'll be, obviously we talked about the space tourism. Is there other industries we'll be mining in space, or in the next few years, or is that years and years away and we not see it?
I think that's sometime in the future for space mining. Don't get me wrong. There are some some mad ideas. Like for instance in Mars, for instance, one of the things to habitat, to live on Mars, sorry, would be to go to Mars and drill like a kilometre down. But of course, we're not doing that on Earth yet. So to talk about doing that in space is a little bit far fetched. I do actually see that with the proliferation of low Earth orbit satellites, for instance, I think that that will be huge over the next 10 years. People see this as communications. So, for instance, your car driving along would be able to talk to that satellite that isn't so far in space, and so the latency, i.e. the time for the signal to get there and back again, wouldn't be so big. And so this kind of market, I think, will be the one that will really see big growth in over the next 10 years or so.
Well, and just as we're talking this and more questions are jumping to my head, I think I'll be in trouble if I don't ask as ever. In space, and all the things that we're reading in the papers, that's where all the questions are coming from. Is there loads of space debris as well? Then the rockets are going up and now coming back down.
So there is talk about that, which is one of our, in fact, our very first project was to develop a very high frequency space debris detecting radar. So there's the components for that. So I mentioned about, like, for instance, something the size of a bolt, which couldn't be detected by lower frequency radar systems, but with the higher frequency ones, something so small can be detected. It doesn't take a very big object to pierce a hole in the skin of a spacecraft or a space station, and it's something that we should be worried about, but it's maybe not just as critical as people are thinking at the minute. But we shouldn't stop worrying about it, because it is going to be a problem as more and more satellites are launched and it gets more crowded. Then things are going to happen.
No, very interesting, because obviously we're reading everything about pollution and our own economy or environments here, the plastic particles in the sea and the fish, and we wouldn't want to see something similar happen again in space, because it's a big problem. So what's the future then for space production in Ireland and for your own company? What do you think is the future then? Have you short-term plans?
So I mentioned that we're looking to do sort of develop the technologies that we have already developed for space, but to make them more commercially feasible, for instance, if that's right, for Earth, but to get them to a point where they're mass produced. Obviously, space technologies are developed to such a high level and to such a precision, which just makes reproducing them for the mass markets really difficult. But we have developed a number of innovative ideas and patented ideas that we can, and we do believe that we will be able to mass produce, for instance, that radar module that I was talking about, but for the communications market, for instance. There are companies, for instance, who would be interested in it's very easy to the association with brownout and the military, but we have had, that's where a helicopter comes in and kicks up dirt so they can't see the ground. But we have had actually air rescue companies coming to us, and their problem is whiteout. So this is not a product for the military as such, but for the commercial space. So as the helicopter comes in on a snowy mountainside, so for instance, and the snow is kicked up, it's the same issue that the military have in the desert. And so they're approaching the commercial companies to try and solve the problem that defence companies have been developing in the past. And so, as I say, we are getting a little bit of traction for that. And then, of course, for the high-speed communications, we can adapt that very high-speed communications data rates can be handled by it.
Incredible. So the future is very exciting, and
the future is very exciting. We're here. We have to get to here, and it's that journey across the middle is where we're doing that.
And as you say, when you get to there, actually, that's only
a stepping stone.
Exactly.
Yes,
it's infinite. The opportunity is incredible. So really, really interesting. So if anyone wants to find out more about your company and what you're doing, to reach out, jobs. Anything else?
So the best place to go to is our website, and that's www.arralis.com. and if you search for us on LinkedIn or Twitter or even Facebook, our marketing department are very active on that, and we'll keep you up to date with what Arralis is at.
Brilliant, that's incredible. Thank you again for coming in today
It's
and
a
sharing
pleasure,
a little
yeah.
bit about your company. It was really very interesting to
Okay.
understand what's happening here in Ireland around space, so thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Brilliant. So thank you very much for watching today, and hopefully you enjoyed the content that's been shared and we've all been educated on space. If you did find this video interesting, do share it on social media and do visit the links underneath the video as well. This is Kieran from ProfileTree, the content marketing agency, and hopefully you'll tune in for tomorrow's video. Thank you very much again.